Lovely people, hi. And thank you so much for joining me on another episode of White Lotus Blooms TV. You know, I'm always excited to have you and always grateful that you chose to tune in. Now, today I'm continuing my series on the wellness, and I'm focusing in particular today on depression and suicide. These are heavy topics to discuss, and I must confess to you that last week I made several attempts to make a video on the very said topics, and I got so much into my head, and I got so sidetracked that I did not post last week. But thankfully, there are people in my life who are holding me very accountable, and so I'm back at it this week, and I'm feeling so much better about the whole thing. So here goes. So we want to talk about depression, right? And for many people, depression only means being under the weather. It means having a case of the blues. But I want to add to the whole discourse and add some information to that. Depression, as we psychologists speak of it, is clinical depression, which is a mental disorder that is characterized by several symptoms. In order for a person to be diagnosed with clinical depression, they would have to experience not all, but several of these symptoms for 2 weeks or more to meet that diagnosis criteria. And these symptoms include: one, experiencing a sad or depressed mood most of the time; irritability; avolition, which is loss of will. You have no will. You just can't go on. Feelings of worthlessness, feelings of hopelessness; suicidal ideation, which is a huge one; loss of interest in pleasurable activities. For some people, you can start to have changes in your appetite, where you start to eat less than usual or start to eat more than usual. And similarly, in your sleep patterns, where you start to sleep less than usual, which is hyposomnia, or you start to sleep more than usual, which is hypersomnia. You can also start to experience fatigue and mysterious aches and pains and other symptoms that really have no basis when they're examined. And for many people, there is also a decrease in your ability to concentrate, to think, or to make decisions. This is the nucleus of the symptoms of clinical depression. And I hasten to add that depression is highly treatable. So there is hope. And I'm making this video particularly for persons who are battling depression silently, who feel ashamed about it, and who do not know how to get out of the dark hole that depression is. There is hope. There is treatment that's available, and most importantly, from my heart to yours, that you're not alone. If you look closely at my top today, you can see my scar, and I chose the top on purpose because figuratively also I want to show you my scar. I have battled depression, and so I know it inside out. I've also sat on the opposite side of persons who are battling depression as a psychologist, and I have seen myself in them in so many ways. I'm also wearing my fabulous head wrap. It makes me feel like a queen, and it's definitely helping my whole energy and my whole vibe today in talking about such a very heavy and personal topic such as depression. This head wrap is by Ms. Anne Clark, and I'm going to be sharing her details with you so that you can check out her collection of stunningly African-inspired head wraps. Now, I mentioned what depression is. I want to also share with you some of the factors that can lead to depression. So there can be a biochemical factor, which is that sometimes our neurotransmitters are out of balance. Sometimes our dopamine levels, our serotonin levels just are not where they ought to be, and that can give rise to depression. Just like insulin levels can be out of whack and people can develop diabetes, it's the same way with depression. That's one. There is also a genetic component, which means, like Jamaica people say, it's running in your blood. So if it is that you have a relative who was clinically depressed, then you have a higher likelihood of developing depression and other disorders, including mental disorders. That's just the way it works. It's not an ultimate sentence that you must, but there is a higher likelihood that you could develop depression. There is also the factor of psychosocial stressors. Sometimes a traumatic event can happen, and that can send somebody spiraling into depression. And I hasten to add that adjustment difficulties and depressive symptoms can also come from good changes. So something good happens, but it's a big change, and sometimes managing it is overwhelming, and sometimes, some kind of mental malalignment can take place. There is also the factor of environmental, issues. So persons who are constantly exposed to violence and death and abuse are also quite likely to develop mental disorders, including but not limited to clinical depression. There is also a very interesting component of the gendered differences in depression, and some studies suggest that women are about twice as likely to develop depression than men, and I hasten to add a couple grains of salt to that because statistics can be a very funny thing. But generally, I believe that because of how women manifest depressive symptoms differently from men, and based on our hormonal physiological makeup, I believe that oftentimes women innately or naturally have greater experience with depressive or mood issues than do men from a physiological perspective. And I say that because many of us as women can identify with PMS, premenstrual syndrome. There is also PMDD, which is what I like to think of as PMS times 10, which is a more heightened emotional or mood disruption, greater emotional symptoms than PMS. And PMDD stands for premenstrual dysmorphic disorder. So many things just get out of whack during the time of your menstrual cycle. And it's a marked disruption, it's marked emotional distress, sometimes to the point where when it is that period, ends, looking back, we can be like, oh my God, what really happened? For some women, getting pregnant, of course, hormone changes take place during pregnancy. So for many women, they become hyper-emotional or increasingly emotional during pregnancy. And at the end of pregnancy, whether by birth or, God forbid, through a miscarriage, of course, the stressors that come with actually giving birth to a human being and, considerations of how much support you have, etc. And again, hormonally, some women can be affected and can develop postpartum depression, which so many women have battled and don't even know what happened. They don't know what it named. They feel shame to talk about it, etc. And many of us as women don't even think a little bit longer ahead or farther ahead to when it is that we are entering into menopause and the hormonal changes there. Those hormonal changes can also give rise to, mood disruptions, to changes in your mood, and can give rise to depression as well. Because at that time, there is a decrease in our estrogen levels, and that can have a host of implications for our mood, for our thinking, etc. So another thing to bear in mind also as it relates to the gender differences in depression is that sometimes men manifest depressive symptoms very differently than do women. So women oftentimes will, call a friend, will cry, will get sad and withdrawn, and you can see that visibly. But for some men, especially I suspect based on how we socialize our boys and our men, for many men, depressive behavior can look totally different. It can look like reckless behavior. It can look like escapist behavior. So men just get very lost in work, i.e. the workaholic syndrome, or they get very caught up in a hobby or just disengaging from what it is that could elicit those feelings, could stir those feelings up that, remind them that they are depressed. And because of that, sometimes that can influence how some of the research looks. And so there are differences, yes, but we just have to remember that both men and women battle depression in most debilitating ways, even though we may manifest differently, and that the way we are currently socializing our boys to not cry when they're hurt and to be tough until like tough 24/7, 365 is not helping anybody. When we as young women buck up these men as potential partners, it's stress and disgrace reach us because of their emotional inadequacies. But who is socializing the majority of these boys? Many of those persons are single mothers. And so we as women, I believe, are also implicated, if even slightly, in some of those issues. So across the board, my point here today is that both men and women battle depression, and we need to be sensitive to each other generally. If I could just speak very quickly to the church, because within the church space, a lot of people suffer from depression silently or in shame, and I believe that that's a gross disservice that the church, which should be a healing center, can be, can be accused of, sometimes rightfully accused of, in that regard. So I want you to say a couple things to the church. Firstly, can I just say that sometimes it's not the devil, sometimes it's dopamine. That's a neurotransmitter that sometimes gets out of whack and can lead to depression. Sometimes it's not a spirit. Sometimes it's the stricture imposed by the very church that is now judging the depressed person. You cannot do this. If you do this, you will have these consequences to face. Sometimes you don't need spiritual warfare as a church against depression. You just need to remove the shame and the stigma that you place on saints who are not shouting all the time. Sometimes it's not because she wants a man. It's because she was neglected by the one that God charged to father her or love her like Christ loved the church. Sometimes it's not because he is weak, but because you taught him that to be strong, he should feel no pain. I also want to leave a quick word with the friends and loved ones of persons who are depressed. Sometimes your words, though said in jest, leave wounds that you can't see. Sometimes you keeping it real did more damage than your I'm here for you can fix 6 months later. Sometimes they laugh with you while you pierce them with your words because your words sound like the voices in their head. Still, please restrain yourself. Sometimes they tried to tell you and you made it all about you. I want to say a couple other words in terms of what is sensitive or kind things to say or not say to someone who is battling depression. Depression is a choice. It's not helpful. Period. Point blank. Snap out of it. That's not going away. God only gives his hardest battles to his strongest soldiers. Or God never gives us more than we can bear. That may be true, but to the depressed person, it's not particularly helpful nor sensitive. Sometimes people will say to you, but I thought you loved the Lord. Yes, I do love the Lord, but I'm still depressed. Thanks for checking. It's important for us to always bear in mind, and some of us don't know, so there is, a reasonable justification that depression is a mental condition that oftentimes results in grossly irrational thoughts. So these platitudes that we sometimes want to use and just, balm somebody with depression, they literally don't work, one, and sometimes they can be irritating. So, how do I know all of this? As I mentioned about my scar, I have scars that I got from battling depression. And looking back now at depressed Kamala, sometimes it's shocking to me how warped my thinking got. For example, right now as I'm sitting and talking to you, I think I'm an awesome human being. I think I'm an amazing woman. Back then, when I was battling clinical depression, I was convinced that I was the scum of the earth, like I was the worst human being that ever set foot on planet Earth. I was convinced, guys. I was a Christian, as in a Christian who go to church and pray and praise, and I was convinced that there was no hope. There was no getting better. I did not believe that God could take me out of my hole. I thought that just slipping away by suicide was the only way. So don't come to Kamala, right, and preach this doctrine of Christian people should not know. Complete rubbish. Please disabuse yourselves of that. I remember there are days when I hated myself so intensely. It's like the words could not come. I remember days when the people who loved me the most were my biggest enemies. Like, don't speak to me. Because I didn't feel as though they were willing nor able to fully meet me where I was. And perhaps they were not. And perhaps they should have done something a little bit differently. But the fact is, depression is a thing that clouds your judgment to the extent that sometimes things that you held as, foundation truths no longer hold. And that is why it can be such a very dangerous place to be in. And so today, I am leaving with somebody out there who is battling depression. I want you to know firstly that you are not alone. I sit now across from persons who are battling depression, And I feel a usefulness that I can't put into words because I've been there, I've walked the walk. I am now on the opposite side. I came out of it. I survived. And you can too. And for all the people who are watching who are not depressed, who may never have been depressed, I am asking and on the other hand begging on behalf of persons who are depressed, who you may know, please be kinder with your words. Please be kinder with your energy. Please be sensitive to the fact that what is joke to me is death to somebody else. So not because I didn't crumble when my boyfriend left me does not give you the license to tell somebody that they should just snap out of it if that happens to them. Because different things affect each of us in a different way. Not because I failed several university courses and did not collapse does not give you the freedom. Who gives you this power to just tell people what they should feel depressed about or not about? It doesn't work like that. For those people who feel this incredible license to just put the most hateful, vile comments under people's pictures and videos or memes or whatever on social media, I'm begging you, how many more children, how many more people do we need to lose to suicide for us to realize that we are a part of the problem? Not because you don't know the person means that your words are less hurtful to them or that you should give yourself the freedom to just let it hang. No. And for those of us who claim to love our friends and to love people, I'm encouraging you to check in. And this is not the check-in that I'm seeing so many people talking about in the way, just make a quick phone call and just send a quick WhatsApp. No, building relationships is so important so that sometimes you can sense energetically when something is off, but somebody can't put it into words. There are many people who have spoken to their loved ones in this minute and committed suicide in 5 minutes following. And the person who they spoke to did not know or see it coming, because it's not easy to let somebody in when you're feeling so desperately vulnerable. And so we have to foster this habit as human beings and as people who claim to love and to care, to really be committed to our friendships. Obviously, we can't talk all the time, 24/7, but have meaningful dialogue. And another thing is that I think we all have a responsibility from time to time. Maybe you agree, maybe you don't. But I feel one for myself, which is to show your scars. Show your vulnerability. After you have, of course, processed it and you have owned it and you are in a place of wellness, you can talk about it. Because I wasn't able to talk about some of these things before a certain point. Because sometimes we create the facades that help other people to look on and erroneously conclude that they are the only ones who understand what it's like to be broke, to be bankrupt, to be scared, to be so affected by reputational attacks, and to be so affected by relationship changes, to be so affected by singleness, and to be so affected by divorce, that they are the only ones who know what it's like. Because sometimes we deliberately paint a false picture because we want to protect our own images. And so today I encourage us to be kinder, to be more honest, and to be sensitive. Thank you for watching. I hope this video really helps someone. For those of you who want to reach out to me, please feel free to do so. You can email me whatever issues, concerns, requests, queries you may have, or just to share at whitelotusbloomsja@gmail.com, or you can reach out to me via DM at White Lotus Blooms on Instagram. I'm looking forward to hearing whatever comments you may have, and I'm looking forward to you sharing this video, especially for those who are battling and feel like they're the only ones. Much love, much love, much love to you all.